The plasma cannon's barrel pressed cold against Marcus Chen's temple as he knelt on the transport ship's metal floor. Around him, 23 other human prisoners waited in similar positions, their hands bound behind their backs with energy shackles that hummed with deadly voltage. The Vorthack soldiers towered over them, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the harsh artificial lights. "Another batch of slaves for the mining colonies," growled Commander Zektar, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. "These soft-skinned creatures breed quickly, perfect for dangerous work." Marcus kept his head down, but his eyes tracked every detail of the ship's layout. The former Navy intelligence officer had been captured during the Battle of Europa Station, along with thousands of other humans when Earth's defenses finally crumbled. That was 6 months ago. Since then, he'd been processed through 3 different prisoner facilities, watching and learning. The Vorthack Empire controlled half the galaxy, built on the backs of enslaved species. Humans were just the latest addition to their collection. The transport ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the small portholes, Marcus caught glimpses of a massive space station orbiting a purple gas giant. The station was unlike anything in human space. Organic curves blended with crystalline structures, creating something that looked grown rather than built. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed along its surface like a heartbeat. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," Zektar announced with cruel amusement. "The jewel of the Vorthack Empire. You humans will have the honor of mining rare crystals for our war machine in the deep tunnels beneath the station. Most species last about 2 years before the radiation poisoning becomes terminal." A young woman beside Marcus began to sob quietly. He wanted to offer comfort, but any movement would earn a plasma bolt to the head. Instead, he memorized the guard positions, the ship's control systems, anything that might prove useful later. The docking procedure took an hour. When the airlock finally opened, they were herded out into a massive cargo bay filled with beings from dozens of different worlds. Marcus recognized some from Earth's xenobiology databases: the silicon-based Korthani, the aquatic Delphians, the insectoid Zilnari. All wore the same energy shackles. All bore the hollow look of the enslaved. But something was different here. As they were processed through decontamination chambers and given prisoner uniforms, Marcus noticed subtle signs of organization among the slaves. Hand signals passed between different species groups. Certain individuals moved with purpose despite their chains. There was resistance here. The holding cells were cramped metal boxes, each designed to house 6 beings. Marcus found himself sharing space with 2 other humans, a Delphian whose blue skin had faded from stress, and 2 creatures he didn't recognize, tall, graceful beings with silver hair and luminous amber eyes. One of them, obviously female, carried herself with unmistakable authority despite her shackles. "You're new," she said in perfectly accented galactic standard, her voice carrying an unusual musical quality. "Human, from the Sol system?" Marcus nodded carefully. In his experience, it was better to say little until he understood the dynamics. "I am Lyralii," she continued. "This is my aide, Fendal. We are Etherian." The name sent a shock through Marcus. Etherians were legendary, an ancient species that had supposedly vanished from the galaxy millennia ago. Their technology had been the foundation for most modern galactic civilization, but they had withdrawn from galactic affairs and were thought extinct. "Etherians are myths," whispered Sarah, one of the human prisoners. Lyralii's amber eyes flashed with something that might have been amusement. "We allowed that belief to spread. It served our purposes. But the Vorthack discovered one of our hidden worlds 3 years ago. I was captured while trying to evacuate our archives." She paused, studying Marcus intently. "You carry yourself like a soldier. Intelligence services, perhaps?" Marcus remained silent, but Lyralii nodded as if he had confirmed her guess. "The resistance network here extends through 17 species and for 1,000 prisoners," she said quietly. "But we've been waiting for the right catalyst. The Vorthack fear humans more than they admit. Your species' reputation for unpredictability and violence has spread through their military. That's not entirely a good thing," Marcus replied carefully. "Perhaps not. But sometimes fear can be a useful weapon." The next morning, they were taken to the mining levels deep within the station. The tunnels were carved through living rock that gleamed with veins of blue-white crystal. The air was thick with radiation and the screams of overworked extraction equipment. Guards with shock prods drove the workers harder, and Marcus saw several prisoners collapse from exhaustion only to be dragged away, presumably to die. His work assignment was in Section 7, the deepest and most dangerous part of the mines. The radiation here was so intense that even the Vorthack guards wore protective gear. Marcus was given a primitive scanner and told to identify the richest crystal veins for the extraction teams. What the guards didn't know was that Marcus had spent 2 years studying exotic matter physics before joining the Navy. As he moved through the tunnels, ostensibly looking for valuable crystals, he was actually mapping the station's power grid. The energy conduits ran through these same tunnels, and he began to understand the elegant engineering behind Nexus Prime. The station drew power from the gas giant's magnetic field using a network of orbital tethers. But the design was more sophisticated than human technology could achieve. It was definitely based on Etherean principles. If someone knew how to disrupt the power flow at the right points, they could potentially cripple the entire station. During the meal break, he managed to position himself near Lyralii in the crowded cafeteria. The food was a gray protein paste that barely qualified as nutrition, but it kept them alive. The power systems, he whispered while pretending to eat. They're Etherean designed, aren't they? She looked at him sharply. You understand the technology? Some of it. Enough to know that there are vulnerabilities if you know what to look for. The Vorthack captured our engineers along with our archives. They've been forcing our people to improve their infrastructure for 3 years. But there are safeguards built into Etherean technology that they haven't discovered. Marcus felt a spark of hope for the first time since his capture. Backdoors. More than that, our technology is biometrically keyed. Only those with Etherean genetic markers can access the highest levels of system control. She paused. But the systems also respond to what you might call commanding presence. A voice raised in authority can sometimes override local controls. You're talking about some kind of vocal recognition system? Not recognition. Resonance. Etherean technology was designed to respond to the harmonics of our language when spoken with proper intention. But we've discovered that certain other voices can achieve similar effects, particularly under conditions of extreme stress or authority. That evening, back in their cell, Lyralii began to explain the true scope of the situation. Nexus Prime wasn't just a mining operation. It was the Vorthack Empire's primary staging ground for their expansion into the Outer Rim worlds. The rare crystals mined here were used to power their most advanced warships, and the station itself housed the fleet that had conquered Earth. If we could disable this station, she said quietly, it would cripple their ability to hold their newest conquests. Worlds might have a chance to rebuild their defenses. You're talking about revolution, Marcus said. I'm talking about survival. For all our species. Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into understanding both the station's layout and the resistance network. He learned that the various alien prisoners had developed a complex communication system using everything from bioluminescent patterns to controlled coughing fits. Messages could be passed through the entire facility within hours. The resistance had weapons hidden in the mining equipment and had even managed to subvert a few guard positions. But they lacked coordination and, more critically, they lacked access to the station's vital systems. The Vorthack had learned from previous slave revolts and had designed Nexus Prime to be virtually uprising-proof. Marcus also learned more about Lyralii herself. She wasn't just any Etherean. She was a member of their ruling council, essentially galactic royalty. Her capture had been a major victory for the Vorthack, not just for propaganda purposes, but because her genetic signature could unlock Etherean technology across the Empire. They've been trying to force me to activate various systems, she explained during one of their covert conversations. So far, I've been able to resist. But they're becoming more creative in their persuasion methods. Marcus had noticed the fresh burn marks on her arms, the way she sometimes moved stiffly. The Vorthack were torturing her for access to her own people's technology. How long can you hold out? Not much longer. They've threatened to start executing prisoners from my homeworld if I don't cooperate. They're bringing in a new batch tomorrow. The next day's prisoner arrival changed everything. Marcus watched from the mining level as a new transport docked. Through the bay windows, he could see the new arrivals, tall, silver-haired Etherians being dragged from the ship in chains. But these weren't just any prisoners. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the ornate robes, the ceremonial markings. These were Etherian nobles, possibly even royal family members. That evening, Lyralii was taken for another interrogation session. When she returned, her face was pale and her hands were shaking. "They have my brother," she said simply, "and my sister's children." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What do they want?" "Complete access to the station's core systems. They want me to reconfigure the power grid to support a new weapon system they're installing. Something that will allow them to destroy entire planetary populations without damaging the infrastructure." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. The Vorthack weren't content with conquest. They were planning genocide on a galactic scale. "We have to move now," he said, "before they complete their weapon." "Move to what?" "We're slaves in chains, and they have hostages to ensure my cooperation." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking through everything he'd learned about the station's systems and the resistance network. Then, he looked up at Lyralii with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "You said Etherian technology responds to commanding voices under conditions of extreme stress." "Yes, but only to those with the proper genetic markers or dash, or those who speak with true authority." Marcus's voice was gaining strength as the plan crystallized in his mind. What if we created a situation where that authority was undeniable? Where even the technology would have to recognize the rightful command? Lyralii stared at him, her amber eyes widening with understanding. "You're suggesting we stage a revolution. I'm suggesting we stage a moment. A single moment where the natural order asserts itself so powerfully that even alien technology has to acknowledge it. That's completely insane. The best plans usually are." The next morning, Marcus began putting the pieces in motion. Using the Resistance communication network, he started spreading a message through the entire prisoner population. Be ready for anything, and when the moment came, follow the voice of authority without question. He also began studying the specific harmonic frequencies of Lyralii's natural speech patterns. If his theory was correct, human vocal cords might be able to approximate the resonance patterns needed to activate Etherian systems, but only under exactly the right conditions. 3 days later, those conditions arrived. Commander Zektar announced that the weapon installation was complete and that Lyralii would demonstrate the system's capabilities by activating it for a test run on a nearby uninhabited world. If she refused, her family members would be executed one by one until she complied. As the prisoners were herded into the main assembly hall to witness what the Vorthack clearly intended as a display of absolute power, Marcus caught Lyralii's eye across the crowded space. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. The stage was set. For 1,000 enslaved beings filled the hall, their chains humming with energy. Hundreds of Vorthack guards lined the walls, weapons ready. At the center of it all stood the activation console for the station's new weapon system, its Etherian-designed controls glowing with soft blue light. Commander Zektar forced Lyralii forward, her family members lined up behind her with execution devices pressed to their necks. "Activate the weapon," he commanded. "Show these slaves what happens to worlds that resist the Empire." Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 4,000 pairs of eyes upon him. Everything depended on the next few moments. The human stepped forward from the crowd of prisoners, his chains still humming with deadly energy, his voice cutting through the silence of the massive assembly hall. "No." The single word echoed through the assembly hall like a thunderclap. For 1,000 enslaved beings turned their eyes toward the human who had dared speak against the Vorthack commander. Marcus Chin stood perfectly still, his energy shackles humming dangerously as the automated systems registered his defiance. Commander Zektar's mandibles clicked with rage. "What did you say, slave?" Marcus stepped forward again, and this time his voice carried with it all the authority he had ever commanded as a Navy intelligence officer, all the weight of human stubbornness, and something deeper, something that seemed to resonate with the very walls of the station itself. "I said no. This ends here." The reaction was instantaneous. The Etherian-designed control panels around the hall began to flicker with unusual patterns of light. Lyraliai's eyes went wide with shock as she realized what was happening. The technology was responding to Marcus's voice, recognizing something in its harmonic frequency that aligned with its deepest programming. But the Vorthak guards were already moving. Plasma weapons swung toward Marcus as Zektar roared orders. The human would be dead in seconds unless the plan worked perfectly. That's when Lyraliai made her move. Stand down, by order of the Etherian crown. Her voice rang out with millennia of royal authority, pitched to harmonize with Marcus's command. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every Etherian design system in the station responded simultaneously. The lights dimmed and flared in complex patterns. The artificial gravity fluctuated. Most importantly, the prisoner's energy shackles suddenly deactivated as the technology recognized the voice of its true masters. For 1,000 beings looked down at their freed hands in stunned silence. Marcus didn't waste a moment. Now, he shouted, his voice carrying across the hall. Freedom or death. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Korthani prisoners rushed the nearest guards with their silicon-based strength. Delphians used their agility to seize weapons. The Zilnari coordinated attacks with their hive-mind communication. And the humans fought with the desperate fury that had made them legendary across the galaxy. But this wasn't just a prison riot. The resistance had been planning for months, and now they executed their strategy with precision. Hidden weapons emerged from mining equipment. Guard stations that had been secretly compromised turned on their own forces. Passages that should have been sealed suddenly opened, allowing prisoners to flood into critical areas of the station. Commander Zektar tried to retreat toward the command center, but Marcus was already moving. The human officer had studied the hall's layout for weeks, and he intercepted the Vorthak commander near the main control console. "You cannot stop the Empire," Zektar snarled, his plasma weapon trained on Marcus. "Kill me, and 1,000 ships will come to avenge this station." "Maybe," Marcus replied, circling slowly. "But they'll arrive too late to save your genocide weapon." Behind them, Lyraliai was working frantically at the control console. Her freed hands danced across the Etherian interfaces, unlocking systems that had been sealed for 3 years. The station's power grid was responding to her commands, but she needed time to access the deepest levels of control. Zektar fired, but Marcus had anticipated the shot. He rolled behind a support pillar as plasma bolts scorched the air where he had been standing. The Vorthak commander was larger and stronger, but Marcus had advantages too. He knew the terrain, and, more importantly, he knew that backup was coming. Sarah and 2 other human prisoners arrived just as Zektar rounded the pillar. The combined assault from multiple angles overwhelmed even the commander's superior strength and armor. Within minutes, the leader of Nexus Prime lay unconscious on the deck. "Status report," Marcus called out as he secured the commander's weapon. Around the hall, the battle was turning decisively in favor of the prisoners. 3 years of planning and coordination had paid off. The Vorthak guards were either dead, captured, or fleeing toward fortified positions deeper in the station. "Primary security grid is down," called out Fondao from across the room. The Etherian aide was working at a secondary control station. "Backup power is still online, but I can access the communication systems." "Do it. Contact any free ships in the area. Tell them Nexus Prime is under new management." Lyraliai looked up from the main console, her face grave. "Marcus, you need to see this. The weapon they were building, it's worse than we thought." She gestured toward a holographic display showing the gas giant system. Marcus could see the massive energy collectors orbiting the planet, feeding power to the station. But now he could also see what the Vorthak had added, a focusing array that could channel the entire planet's magnetic field into a coherent energy beam. "This isn't just a weapon," Lyraliai explained. "It's a stellar engineering project. They can literally ignite gas giants, turn them into short-lived stars. The radiation burst would sterilize every world within 50 light years." The scope of the Vorthak's ambition hit Marcus like a physical blow. They weren't just planning to conquer the galaxy. They were planning to remake it entirely, burning out any system that might harbor future resistance. How many of these things are they building? According to these files, 12. One for each of the major stellar regions. They plan to demonstrate the first one tomorrow. On which system? Lyraliai's hands trembled as she pulled up the target data. Sol. They're going to make an example of humanity's home system. Marcus felt something cold and deadly settle in his chest. Earth might already be conquered, but it still held 2 billion human refugees on Luna and the outer colonies. His own sister lived on Titan Station with her children. Can we stop it from here? The weapon draws power from this station. If we can overload the system, cause a cascade failure. She paused, studying the technical readouts. Yes, but it would require someone to manually override the safety systems from the primary control room. And that room is in the most heavily defended part of the station. Marcus was already planning the assault in his head. How long do we have? 6 hours until the weapon reaches full charge. But, Marcus, there's something else. Overloading the system won't just destroy the weapon. The feedback will cause a chain reaction in the gas giant's magnetic field. This entire system will be uninhabitable for centuries. How many prisoners are still on the station? About 8,000, counting the ones in the other detention centers. And the evacuation capacity? Fundao looked up from his console. The prisoner transport ships can carry maybe 2,000 if we pack them dangerously full. The Vorthack fleet has larger ships, but most of them departed yesterday for the Sol system. Marcus did the math and didn't like the answer. Even if they could capture enough ships, they couldn't evacuate everyone before the system became a death trap. But if they did nothing, billions would die when the Vorthack demonstrated their new weapon on Earth. There has to be another way. Lyraliai was already shaking her head. The weapon system is too integrated with the station's power grid. There's no way to safely disable it without causing the overload. The tactical situation was becoming clear, and Marcus didn't like it at all. They had perhaps 4 hours to fight their way to the primary control room, manually override systems that would require Etherian genetic authorization, and then somehow escape before the entire system exploded. Meanwhile, they needed to coordinate the evacuation of 8,000 prisoners using inadequate ships and hostile forces. We need to split up, Marcus decided. Lyraliai, take half the resistance fighters and start the evacuation. Get as many people off this station as possible. What about you? I'm taking a strike team to the control room. Someone has to trigger the overload. That's suicide. Even if you succeed, you'll never make it back to the evacuation ships in time. Marcus smiled grimly. Maybe, but sometimes that's what it takes. He turned to address the liberated prisoners who had gathered around the control area. Listen up. We've got one shot at stopping a genocide, but it's going to cost us. I need volunteers for a mission that probably won't have survivors. The response surprised him. Nearly 200 beings stepped forward, representing every species in the resistance. These weren't soldiers, they were miners, engineers, and civilian refugees. But 3 years of slavery had taught them the value of freedom, and they were willing to die for it. Sir, Sarah stepped up to Marcus with a determined expression. We've been following your lead since the battle started. We're not stopping now. Marcus felt a surge of pride and grief. These people trusted him with their lives, and he was about to lead them into almost certain death. But the alternative was worse. All right, Lyraliai, you have 2 hours to get the evacuation started. After that, we move on the control room. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of desperate activity. The resistance fighters had captured most of the station's primary levels, but the Vorthack had retreated to heavily fortified positions around the critical systems. Automated defenses had been activated, turning corridors into killing zones filled with plasma turrets and energy barriers. Meanwhile, the evacuation proceeded with chaotic urgency. Thousands of prisoners were herded toward the docking bays while resistance fighters worked to capture and prepare every available ship. But progress was slow, and it quickly became clear that they would never evacuate everyone in time. Marcus was studying tactical displays in what had been Commander Zektar's office when Lyraliai found him. The evacuation ships are loading now, she reported. But we're only going to get about 3,000 people off the station before you have to trigger the overload. That's not acceptable. It's mathematics, Marcus. We don't have enough ships or enough time. Marcus stared at the tactical display, watching the movements of his strike teams as they probed the Vorthack defenses. The control room was located in the station's central core, protected by multiple layers of automated defenses and the last 200 Vorthack guards. Getting there would require fighting through a maze of death traps and energy barriers. But there might be another way. The focusing array, he said suddenly. It's controlled from here. But the actual hardware is external, right? Lyralii nodded. The focusing elements are mounted on the orbital tethers that collect energy from the gas giant. What if we don't overload the entire system? What if we just destroy the focusing array? That would stop the weapon but leave the station's primary power grid intact. Impossible. The focusing elements are hardened against everything short of antimatter weapons. And even if we could damage them, the Vorthack could repair them within days. Marcus smiled. Not if we use the tethers themselves as weapons. He pulled up the engineering schematics that Lyralii had unlocked earlier. The orbital tethers were massive structures, each 1 kilometer long, and designed to channel enormous amounts of energy. They were also flexible, held in position by magnetic fields and gravitational calculations. If we could destabilize the tethers' orbits, make them swing into each other. Lyralii's eyes widened as she understood. A cascade collision. The tethers would destroy themselves and take the focusing array with them. And the station would lose primary power but remain structurally intact. We'd have to switch to backup power, but everyone could survive. Marcus felt hope returning for the first time in hours. What would it take to destabilize the tethers? Access to the orbital control system, which is located in the primary control room. Of course it is. Marcus looked at the tactical display again. The assault on the control room was still a desperate mission with low chances of survival. But now, instead of a guaranteed suicide run, it offered at least the possibility that everyone might make it home. Change of plans, he announced to the assembled resistance leaders. We're not destroying the station. We're stealing it. The final assault began at the 4-hour mark. Marcus led his strike team through the maintenance tunnels while other resistance groups created diversions throughout the station. The Vorthack defenses were formidable, but they had been designed to prevent escape, not to stop a coordinated military assault from within. The human officer found himself thinking about the strange chain of events that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been captured as a slave. Now he was leading a revolution that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. The irony wasn't lost on him. But as they approached the final checkpoint before the control room, Marcus realized that the real test was still ahead. The voice that had started this revolution would need to finish it. And, in the depths of an alien space station, as plasma bolts filled the air around him, Marcus Chin prepared to speak with the authority of 4,000 freed souls behind him. The control room's blast doors stood 3 meters thick, forged from Vorthack battle steel, and reinforced with energy fields that could stop a starship's main gun. Behind those doors lay the heart of Nexus Prime's power grid, and the key to stopping a genocide that would claim billions of lives. Marcus Chun crouched behind a makeshift barrier of mining equipment, plasma bolts sizzling overhead as the last Vorthack defenders made their stand. His strike team had fought through 12 levels of automated defenses, losing nearly half their numbers to energy turrets and shock mines. But they were here at the final obstacle. Status report. He called to Sarah, who was monitoring their captured Vorthack communication equipment. The evacuation ships launched 10 minutes ago, she replied, ducking as another volley of plasma fire scorched the air above them. Lyralii got about 4,000 people off the station. The rest are holding defensive positions throughout the facility. For thousands saved, for thousands still trapped. The mathematics of war were always brutal, but Marcus had learned to focus on what could be changed rather than what was already lost. Fundal, what's the power grid status? The Etherian aide was hunched over a portable scanner, monitoring the station's energy systems. The weapon array is at 60% charge. At current rates, it'll reach firing threshold in 90 minutes. 90 minutes to breach doors that could withstand orbital bombardment, fight through whatever defenses waited inside, and somehow convince alien technology to obey a human voice. Marcus had faced worse odds, but not by much. There has to be another way in, muttered Jax, one of the Korthani resistance fighters. His silicon-based physiology made him naturally resistant to energy weapons, but even he was showing burn marks from the intense fighting. Marcus studied the schematics they had downloaded from the station's database. The control room was a fortress within a fortress, designed to be absolutely impregnable. But the Vorthack had made one crucial mistake. They had based their designs on captured Ethereum technology without fully understanding its principles. The ventilation system, Marcus said suddenly. Ethereum environmental controls are organic, designed to respond to biological needs. If we could convince the system that there was a life-threatening emergency inside the control room. Sarah looked at him skeptically. You're talking about tricking alien technology into opening security doors. That's impossible. Not impossible. Just very, very difficult. Marcus pulled out the small recorder he had salvaged from Commander Zektar's office. For the past hour, he had been analyzing the harmonic patterns of Lyreliai's voice during their earlier escape, trying to understand exactly what frequencies the Ethereum technology responded to. Human vocal cords weren't designed to produce the same sounds as Ethereum ones, but, under extreme stress, with precise pitch control, it might be possible to approximate the necessary harmonics. The technology had responded to his voice during the initial breakout, but that had been during a moment of perfect synchronization with Lyreliai's commands. I need you to set up a distraction, he told his strike team. Draw their fire toward the main entrance. I'm going to try something. Sir, if you're planning what I think you're planning, you should know that the environmental system's security protocols are probably designed by Etherians who believe that authority comes from within, not from weapons or chains. Marcus was already moving toward the auxiliary maintenance panel near the blast doors. Sometimes you have to speak to the heart of a system, not just its surface programming. The maintenance panel was smaller than the main controls, but connected to the same Ethereum bioneural networks that ran throughout the station. Marcus placed his hand on the organic interface surface and felt it respond to his body heat and bioelectricity. The system was trying to identify him, running through its databases of authorized personnel. He thought about everything that had led to this moment. The capture, the months of slavery, the gradual understanding that the galaxy was at a turning point. The Vorthack Empire had grown too strong, too confident in their technological superiority. But technology was only as powerful as the will behind it, and sometimes that will could be challenged. Environmental system, recognize emergency protocol, Marcus said, pitching his voice to match the harmonic patterns he had studied. The words came out strangely modulated, almost musical in their cadence. The panel flickered with uncertain light. Somewhere in the bioneural networks, ancient programming was trying to parse a voice that shouldn't exist, a human speaking with the authority patterns of Ethereum royalty. Life support crisis detected in primary control chamber. Override security protocols for emergency access. The system hesitated. Marcus could feel its confusion through the interface, algorithms trying to reconcile impossible data. A human voice shouldn't be able to activate emergency protocols, but the harmonic patterns were correct. The authority markers were authentic. Please, Marcus whispered, and in that single word he put everything. The desperation of 4,000 freed slaves, the weight of billions of lives hanging in the balance, the fundamental truth that all sentient beings deserved to choose their own destiny. The blast doors shuddered and began to open. The reaction from both sides was immediate. Vorthack defenders inside the control room opened fire through the widening gap, while Marcus's strike team rushed to take advantage of the opportunity. Plasma bolts and projectile weapons filled the air as two forces collided in the narrow opening. Marcus was the first one through, his captured Vorthack weapon laying down suppressing fire as his team followed. The control room was vast, filled with organic Ethereum interfaces blended with harsh Vorthack military additions. Holographic displays showed the weapon array's charging progress, orbital mechanics of the gas giant system, and tactical displays of Vorthack forces throughout the galaxy. But Marcus's attention was focused on the central control station, where a lone Vorthack technician was frantically trying to activate some kind of emergency protocol. Stop, Marcus shouted, his voice carrying the same harmonic authority that had opened the blast doors. The technician froze, not from fear but from sudden confusion. The control systems around him had responded to Marcus's voice, highlighting interface panels and bringing up diagnostic displays as if a legitimate operator had just taken control. The remaining Vorthack guards were down within minutes, overwhelmed by the coordinated assault from Marcus's team. But the real battle was just beginning. The control systems were incredibly complex, a hybrid of Ethereum bioneural networks and Vorthack military programming. Understanding how to safely trigger a cascade failure in the orbital tethers would require both technical expertise and the ability to interface with alien technology. Fundal, I need you on the primary console, Marcus called. You understand the Ethereum systems better than anyone. The Ethereum aide moved to the central station, his hands dancing over the organic interfaces. The tether control system is here, but it's locked behind multiple security protocols. I can access the basic functions, but destabilizing the orbits will require administrative authorization. Marcus joined him at the console, studying the readouts. The orbital tethers were massive structures, each one precisely positioned to maintain stability while channeling enormous amounts of energy. Destabilizing them would be like conducting surgery with explosives, too little force, and nothing would happen, too much, and they might destroy the entire system. What kind of authorization? Ethereum military command codes. The kind that only existed during our ancient wars, before we withdrew from galactic politics. Marcus felt his heart sink. They had come so far, sacrificed so much, only to be stopped by bureaucratic security protocols from a civilization that had vanished thousands of years ago. But then, he remembered something Lyralii had said during their early conversations. Ethereum technology wasn't just programmed, it was designed to evolve, to respond to genuine need and authentic authority. It wasn't enough to have the right codes. You had to speak with the right intention. Show me the command interface. Fundal brought up a holographic display showing the orbital mechanics of the tether array. Each tether was represented by a glowing line stretching from the station to collection points around the gas giant. The system was beautiful in its complexity, a dance of forces that had taken Ethereum engineers centuries to perfect. Marcus placed his hands on the interface and felt the bioneural network respond to his presence. This time, instead of confusion, he sensed something like curiosity. The system was trying to understand what he was, how a human voice could carry the harmonic patterns of command authority. Emergency Protocol 7, he said, the words coming to him as if from memory. Orbital destabilization sequence for military target elimination. The system hesitated again, but Marcus pressed forward. Authorization for 1,000 freed souls, authority derived from moral imperative to preserve life and prevent genocide. It shouldn't have worked. The authorization codes were nonsense. The technical language was improvised. But somehow, the Ethereum bioneural networks understood the deeper meaning behind the words. This wasn't about following programmed instructions. It was about recognizing legitimate authority when all other systems had failed. The holographic display shifted, showing new trajectory calculations for the orbital tethers. One by one, the massive structures began adjusting their positions, moving away from their stable collection points toward collision courses with each other. It's working, Fundal breathed. The tethers are responding to the command codes. Marcus watched the display with growing amazement. The Ethereum engineers had built safeguards into their technology that could recognize moral authority even across species barriers. The system wasn't just following his commands, it was making its own decisions based on the ethical framework built into its core programming. But their victory celebration was short-lived. Alarms began blaring throughout the control room as secondary systems detected the unauthorized changes to the orbital array. Warning, critical system destabilization detected, announced an automated voice in galactic standard. Emergency lockdown in progress. Unauthorized personnel will be eliminated in 60 seconds. Marcus looked around the control room and saw weapons pods emerging from hidden panels in the walls. The Vorthack had installed their own security measures, designed to prevent exactly what he had just accomplished. Can we override the lockdown? Fundal was already working frantically at the console. The Vorthack systems are separate from the Ethereum ones. They're responding to different command hierarchies. How long until the tethers collide? 12 minutes. But the lockdown weapons will activate in 30 seconds. Marcus stared at the displays showing the slowly converging orbital paths. 12 minutes was enough time for the tethers to destroy each other and disable the weapon array permanently. But It wasn't enough time to escape the control room before the automated defenses killed everyone inside. Sir, Sarah spoke up from her position near the blast doors. The evacuation teams are requesting confirmation. Should they wait for us or proceed to minimum safe distance? Marcus looked around at his strike team. Humans, Etherians, Korthani, Delphians, and half a dozen other species who had fought together to reach this moment. They had known it might be a one-way mission, but now that reality was staring them in the face. Tell them to proceed to safe distance. We'll find another way out. But even as he said the words, Marcus wasn't sure he believed them. The lockdown was comprehensive, sealing every exit and activating weapons systems throughout the control room. They might have saved the galaxy from genocide, but they had probably doomed themselves in the process. 20 seconds to weapon activation, announced the automated voice. Marcus turned back to the Etherian interface, placing his hands on the bioneural surface one more time. If the technology could recognize moral authority, maybe it could also recognize the need for mercy. System, recognize priority override. These individuals acted to prevent genocide and preserve life. Grant emergency evacuation authorization. The response was immediate, but not what he expected. Instead of opening exits or disabling weapons, the Etherian systems began displaying a complex series of harmonic patterns on every screen in the room. It was beautiful, like visual music, but Marcus couldn't understand what it meant. It's trying to communicate, Fundal said with growing excitement. The bioneural network is attempting direct interface. With who? With you. It recognizes your voice patterns, but it's confused by your species. It wants to understand how a human can speak with Etherian command authority. The harmonic patterns on the screens were becoming more complex, almost hypnotic in their beauty. Marcus felt drawn to them, as if they were calling to something deep in his consciousness. Without fully understanding why, he began to hum along with the displayed patterns. The effect was instantaneous. Every screen in the control room flared with brilliant light as the bioneural networks suddenly achieved perfect harmonic synchronization. And in that moment of connection, Marcus understood exactly what the Etherian technology had been trying to tell him. The evacuation route wasn't through the sealed doors or disabled weapons. It was through the technology itself. The bioneural networks of Nexus Prime sang with harmonies that had not been heard for 3,000 years. In the control room's central chamber, Marcus Chin stood transfixed as the Etherian technology attempted something that should have been impossible, a direct neural interface with a human mind. The harmonic patterns flowing across the displays weren't just communication. They were an invitation. The ancient Etherian engineers had built their most sophisticated systems to be more than mere tools. Under extreme circumstances, when the moral imperative was clear enough and the need desperate enough, the technology could temporarily merge consciousness with authorized operators. 10 seconds to weapon activation, warned the Vorthack automated defense system, but Marcus barely heard it. The bioneural interface was showing him something extraordinary, a complete three-dimensional map of Nexus Prime's interior, including passages and transit systems that had been sealed for millennia. Emergency transport protocol available, he whispered, the words coming from knowledge that wasn't quite his own. Etherian emergency systems, inactive since the withdrawal. Fundal stared at the displays in amazement. The old transport networks. I thought they were just legends. Apparently not. Marcus's consciousness was partially merged with the station's bioneural networks now, and he could sense the dormant transport system like a vast circulatory system throughout Nexus Prime. It can move us to the evacuation points, but activating it will require. He paused, understanding flooding through him as the Etherian systems shared their deepest secrets. The emergency transport network wasn't just a mechanical system. It was a living organism, a bioneural construct that required conscious direction from someone with the proper authority codes. But those authority codes weren't just words or genetic markers. They were states of consciousness, patterns of thought, and intention that the system could recognize across species barriers. The Etherians had designed their greatest achievements to respond to moral clarity rather than mere technical knowledge. 5 seconds to weapon activation. Everyone join hands, Marcus commanded, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from the station itself. form a circle around the central interface. His strike team didn't hesitate. Humans, Etherians, Korthani, and Delphians linked hands around the glowing bioneural console as the Vorthack weapons powered up to lethal levels. Marcus placed his hands on the interface one final time, his consciousness diving deep into the network's core programming. He could feel the orbital tethers continuing their slow collision course, could sense the weapon array's power levels dropping as its focusing elements moved out of alignment. In 8 minutes, the galaxy's most dangerous weapon would be permanently disabled. But, right now, he had to get his people to safety. Transport authorization, he said, his voice harmonizing with frequencies that human vocal cords should never have been able to produce. Emergency evacuation of resistance leadership to designated safe zones. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Marcus felt his consciousness expand throughout the station as the bioneural networks accepted his authority. For a moment, he was Nexus Prime itself, aware of every corridor, every system, every living being within its vast structure. He could sense the 4,000 prisoners holding defensive positions throughout the station, could feel their fear and determination as they waited to learn if the mission had succeeded. The transport system activated with a sound like singing crystal. The floor beneath the strike team began to glow as bioneural conduits opened pathways through solid matter. This wasn't teleportation, it was something far more sophisticated. The Etherian transport network could temporarily convert matter into organized energy, moving it through the station's bioneural pathways at near light speed. The sensation was indescribable. Marcus felt his consciousness scatter across multiple dimensions while his body was converted to pure information and routed through conduits that existed partially outside normal spacetime. For an instant that felt like hours, he experienced existence from the perspective of the station itself, vast, patient, and infinitely complex. When awareness returned, he was standing in the main evacuation bay alongside his entire strike team. Around them, thousands of freed prisoners were boarding captured Vorthack ships under Lyraliai's direction. The evacuation was proceeding faster than expected, organized with military precision despite the chaotic circumstances. Marcus, Lyraliai rushed toward him, her amber eyes wide with amazement. How did you get here? The transport systems have been dead for 3 millennia. Apparently, they were just sleeping, Marcus replied, his voice still carrying traces of the harmonic frequencies that had activated the ancient network. But we need to finish the evacuation immediately. The tethers will collide in 6 minutes. The next few minutes passed in a blur of desperate activity. The resistance fighters had captured enough ships to carry everyone off the station, but loading 8,000 beings into vessels designed for much smaller crews was a logistical nightmare. Marcus found himself coordinating multiple loading operations while monitoring the orbital mechanics display that showed the approaching tether collision. "Sir," called one of the human prisoners from a communication station. "We're receiving transmissions from the outer system. A Vorthack battle fleet is approaching at maximum speed." Marcus felt his heart sink. They had been so focused on disabling the weapon that they hadn't considered what would happen when the Empire discovered their revolution. A full battle fleet could destroy the evacuation ships long before they reached hyperspace jump points. How long until they arrive? 3 hours at current speed. But, sir, there's something else. The lead ship is broadcasting surrender demands. They're offering to spare anyone who returns to slavery voluntarily. Marcus looked around the evacuation bay at the thousands of beings who had risked everything for freedom. Some were injured, all were exhausted, but none showed any sign of wanting to return to chains. "Send them our response," Marcus said quietly. "Tell them that Nexus Prime is under new management." 2 minutes later, the orbital tethers collided with spectacular results. The massive structures, each one carrying enough energy to power a small star, intersected in a cascade of brilliant destruction that lit up the gas giant's atmosphere like a second sun. The weapon's focusing array was obliterated instantly, taking with it the Empire's ability to turn gas giants into weapons of mass destruction. The shockwave from the collision rocked Nexus Prime, but the station's structure held. Emergency power systems activated throughout the facility as the primary energy grid went offline, but life support remained stable. All ships are loaded. Lyralii reported from the flagship that had once belonged to Commander Zektar. But we still have the problem of the approaching fleet. Our captured vessels aren't equipped for combat. Marcus stood on the bridge of the lead ship, watching the tactical displays that showed both the approaching Vorthak fleet and the spreading debris field from the destroyed tethers. The evacuation convoy was heavily loaded and would be slow to reach hyperspace jump points. In a straight race, the Imperial forces would intercept them long before they could escape. But Marcus had an idea that might turn the tactical situation to their advantage. Lyralii, can you access Nexus Prime's communication systems from here? Yes, the bioneural networks are still responding to Etherean command codes. 1. I want to send a message to every world in this sector. Tell them that the Empire's ultimate weapon has been destroyed and that a successful slave rebellion has captured the Empire's primary staging base. Lyralii stared at him. You want to start a sector-wide revolution? I want to give people hope. The Vorthak Empire is built on the assumption that resistance is futile. But if worlds throughout the sector see that even their strongest fortress can fall to a slave uprising, it could trigger uprisings on dozens of worlds, Fundal added thoughtfully. The Empire's forces are already stretched thin, maintaining control over their recent conquests. Marcus nodded. And a battle fleet rushing to suppress one rebellion might find themselves facing 12 others by the time they arrive. The message went out on all Imperial communication frequencies, carried by Nexus Prime's powerful transmitters to every corner of the sector. Marcus kept the content simple and direct. The Empire's ultimate weapon was destroyed, their strongest fortress was captured, and freedom was possible for anyone willing to fight for it. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, reports were flooding in from across the sector. Slave uprisings on the mining worlds of the Kef system. Open rebellion in the Delphian home fleet. Even a few Imperial garrison worlds were reporting mutinies among their alien auxiliary forces. The Vorthak battle fleet approaching Nexus Prime found themselves recalled to deal with a dozen other crisis points. The sector was erupting in simultaneous rebellions, all inspired by the news that a group of slaves had defeated the Empire's most advanced technology. But the real surprise came from an unexpected source. As the evacuation convoy reached the edge of the system, they were met not by Imperial forces but by a fleet of sleek ships with designs that Marcus had never seen before. Unknown vessels. This is Marcus Chun of the Nexus Prime Liberation Fleet. Identify yourselves. The response came in perfectly modulated galactic standard, but with harmonic undertones that reminded Marcus of the Etherean bioneural networks. Greetings, Marcus Chun. I am Fleet Admiral Silas of the Etherean Restoration Fleet. We have been monitoring your remarkable activities. Lyralii's face went pale. Silas? But he's been missing for 5 years. We assumed he was dead. Not dead, Your Highness. Merely waiting for the right moment to return. It appears that moment has arrived. The new fleet was substantial, 200 ships of advanced design, crewed by Etherians who had supposedly vanished from the galaxy centuries ago. As they moved into formation around the evacuation convoy, Marcus began to understand that the slave uprising at Nexus Prime had triggered something much larger than a simple rebellion. Admiral Silas, he said carefully, exactly how long have you been waiting for this moment? 3,000 years, Commander Chun. Ever since we withdrew from galactic politics, we have been watching and preparing. The Vorthak Empire was always going to overreach eventually. We simply needed the right catalyst to begin the restoration of galactic balance. Marcus looked around the bridge at his exhausted strike team, then out at the convoy of freed slaves following them toward the edge of the system. And you think we're that catalyst? You spoke with the voice of authority to technology that should not have recognized your species. You led a successful rebellion against impossible odds. Most importantly, you did it all without seeking personal power or glory. The Admiral's voice carried notes of approval that seemed to harmonize with the ship's bioneural systems. The galaxy has been waiting for leaders who understand that true authority comes from moral clarity, not superior weapons. What happens now? Now, Commander Chun, you learn that the real war is just beginning. As the convoy jumped to hyperspace, carrying 8,000 liberated beings toward an uncertain future, Marcus found himself wondering what exactly he had set in motion. He had entered Nexus Prime in chains, a captured slave with no hope of freedom. Now he was apparently some kind of galactic revolutionary, allied with a species that was supposed to be extinct. The Etherian technology had recognized something in his voice, some quality of authority that transcended species boundaries. But Marcus was beginning to suspect that the technology itself might have been shaped by forces much older and more complex than he had imagined. The slave uprising was over. The real revolution was about to begin. And somewhere in the depths of hyperspace, the Etherian bioneural networks that had responded to his voice were already making contact with similar systems across the galaxy, spreading the harmonic patterns of liberation like seeds on a cosmic wind. 6 months after the liberation of Nexus Prime, Marcus Chin stood before the assembled representatives of 47 worlds in the Great Council Chamber of New Etheria. The space was vast and organic, grown rather than built, with living walls that pulsed gently with bioluminescent patterns. Above them, a crystalline dome showed the stars of the sector, each point of light representing a world that had thrown off the chains of the Vorthak Empire. It still amazed Marcus that he was here at all. The slave who had entered Nexus Prime in chains was now being hailed as one of the architects of galactic liberation. But, as he looked out at the diverse collection of beings who had gathered to plan their next moves, he knew that the real work was just beginning. "The Empire is regrouping," reported Admiral Silas from his position at the Central Command Station. The Etherian's bioneural interface allowed him to access real-time intelligence from across the galaxy, painting a complex picture of a civilization in upheaval. They've abandoned 12 outer rim sectors to concentrate their forces around the core worlds. Latest estimates suggest they still control roughly 60% of their original territory. Marcus studied the holographic galaxy map that floated in the center of the chamber. Red zones marked areas still under Imperial control, while blue indicated liberated worlds. Green showed contested systems where the outcome remained uncertain. The pattern was encouraging but sobering. They had achieved stunning early victories, but the Empire was far from defeated. "What's the status of the other weapon installations?" asked Lyralii, who now wore the ceremonial robes of an Etherian crown princess. The months of struggle had changed her, hardening her natural authority into something that could command fleets and inspire worlds. 7 of the 12 stellar ignition weapons have been destroyed, Silas replied. The uprisings you triggered spread faster than the Empire could respond. But they've managed to protect the remaining 5 installations, and they're accelerating construction on new ones. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders once again. The liberation of Nexus Prime had been just the beginning. Each freed world had demanded protection, each new rebellion had required support, and every victory had revealed new challenges. The resistance movement that had started with 4,000 slaves now commanded millions of beings across dozens of star systems. But the Vorthak Empire was vast and ancient, with resources and determination that could outlast any single rebellion. The war they had started would require not just military victories, but a fundamental transformation in how galactic civilization organized itself. "The real question," Marcus said, addressing the assembled representatives, "is what kind of galaxy we're fighting to create. It's not enough to defeat the Empire if we just replace one form of oppression with another." The statement sparked immediate debate among the representatives. The Delphian delegate argued for a return to the pre-imperial system of independent worlds. The Korthani wanted a military confederation focused on mutual defense. The human representatives were divided between various forms of democratic federation. Marcus listened to the arguments with growing concern. These were the same debates that had weakened galactic civilization before the Vorthak conquest. Without some unifying principle, the liberation movement would fragment into competing factions, making it vulnerable to imperial counterattacks. "If I may," interrupted a new voice from the chamber's entrance. All conversation stopped as a figure in ceremonial Etherian robes approached the central platform. Marcus recognized her immediately. It was Lyralii's grandmother, the former empress who had ruled the Etherian civilization before their withdrawal from galactic politics. "Your Majesty," Lyralii rose with obvious surprise. "I thought you were maintaining meditation seclusion." The elderly Etherian's amber eyes held depths of wisdom that spoke of millennia of experience. Some events require direct intervention, my dear. The bioneural networks across the galaxy have been singing with harmonies we have not heard since the ancient days. They speak of a human voice that carries the resonance of true authority. All eyes turned to Marcus, who felt distinctly uncomfortable being the center of such attention. I'm just someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time. No, Commander Chun, you are something much more significant than that. The former Empress approached him directly, her presence commanding absolute attention from everyone in the chamber. You are proof that moral authority transcends species barriers, that the principles we built into our technology can recognize legitimate leadership regardless of its origin. She gestured toward the bioneural displays that lined the chamber walls. As she spoke, they began showing complex harmonic patterns that seemed to resonate with some deep frequency in the room itself. 3,000 years ago, we Etherians withdrew from galactic politics because we foresaw this moment. Our scientists predicted that galactic civilization would eventually face a crisis that could only be resolved through the emergence of truly universal principles of governance. We built those principles into our technology and then waited for the right catalyst to activate them. Marcus stared at the harmonic patterns on the displays. You're saying this was all planned? Not planned. Prepared for. There is a significant difference. The Empress's voice carried harmonics that seemed to speak directly to the consciousness of everyone present. We could not know when the crisis would come, or what form it would take, or who would emerge as the catalyst. But we could ensure that our technology would recognize moral authority when it encountered it. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. The bioneural networks that responded to my voice, they were designed to do that. They were designed to recognize leadership that serves the greater good rather than personal ambition. Leadership that speaks with genuine moral authority rather than merely superior force. She paused, her ancient eyes studying Marcus intently. The technology recognized you because you possessed the rarest quality in the galaxy, the ability to command absolute loyalty while seeking no personal power. Marcus looked around the chamber at the representatives of 47 worlds, beings who had followed his lead through the most desperate circumstances imaginable. He thought about the thousands of prisoners who had trusted him with their lives, the resistance fighters who had died believing in the cause he had articulated. I never wanted to command anyone, which is precisely why you are qualified to do so. The Empress moved to the central command station, her hands dancing over controls that Marcus had never seen before. The chamber's bioneural displays shifted, showing new patterns that seemed to encompass the entire galaxy. Behold the true scope of what you have accomplished. The display showed a real-time map of every world in the galaxy, color-coded according to their current political status. But instead of the simple three-color system they had been using, this map showed dozens of different hues representing complex relationships between worlds, species, and governing systems. The liberation of Nexus Prime didn't just trigger rebellions, the Empress explained. It activated dormant bioneural networks that had been waiting in systems across the galaxy. These networks are now facilitating communication and cooperation between species that have been isolated for centuries. Marcus watched in amazement as the display showed data streams flowing between worlds, real-time sharing of technological advances, cultural exchanges that were already beginning to transform entire civilizations. You've created something unprecedented, Admiral Silas added. A truly galactic community based on voluntary cooperation rather than conquest or coercion. But even as Marcus absorbed the scope of what they had achieved, he remained focused on the immediate challenge. The Empire isn't going to sit back and watch this happen. They'll adapt, find new ways to fight the networks. Indeed they will, the Empress agreed, which is why the next phase of your mission is the most crucial. You must travel to the Imperial capital itself and speak with the voice of authority to the networks that control their core systems. The chamber fell silent. The Imperial capital was the most heavily defended system in the galaxy, protected by fleets that could destroy entire star systems and technology that had been hardened against every form of attack known to galactic science. That's suicide, said Lyrelii bluntly. Even our most advanced ships couldn't penetrate the capital's defenses. No ship could, the Empress agreed. But a single individual, speaking with the right harmonic frequency, might be able to reach the bioneural networks that the Empire unknowingly built into their own infrastructure. Marcus studied the galactic display, understanding dawning slowly. You're saying they used Etherian technology for their core systems? All advanced galactic technology is ultimately based on Etherian principles. The Empire conquered our worlds and enslaved our people, but they also became dependent on our innovations. Their most critical systems respond to the same harmonic patterns that open the doors at Nexus Prime. But getting to those systems would require someone willing to walk into the heart of the Empire with nothing but the authority of their own voice. The Empress turned to face Marcus directly. It would require someone who entered in chains, but taught alien queens to rise at the sound of their command. Marcus felt the weight of destiny settling around him like a cloak. Everything that had happened since his capture, the slavery, the rebellion, the liberation of dozens of worlds, had been leading to this moment. I won't ask anyone else to come with me. You won't need to. Lyralii stepped forward, her amber eyes blazing with determination. The bioneural networks can transport you directly to the Imperial capital, the same way they moved your strike team out of Nexus Prime's control room. But this time, you'll be carrying the harmonic resonance of 47 worlds behind your voice. Marcus looked around the chamber one more time, at the representatives of species who had learned to work together despite centuries of isolation and mistrust. The Vordak Empire had sought to rule through fear and superior technology. But these beings had discovered something more powerful, the ability to recognize moral authority and respond to it across any barrier of species or culture. When do we begin? Now, said the Empress, her hands already moving over the ancient controls. The bioneural networks are singing with anticipation. They know that the moment of final liberation is at hand. As the transport sequence initiated, Marcus felt his consciousness expand once again through the vast network that connected civilizations across the galaxy. But this time, instead of moving through the corridors of a single station, he was traveling through the living infrastructure of galactic society itself. The Empire's capital world materialized around him in a burst of harmonic light. He stood in the great throne room of the Vordak Emperor, surrounded by guards and weapons that could kill him in an instant. But none of that mattered now. Marcus Chun, former slave and accidental revolutionary, opened his mouth and spoke with the voice of 47 liberated worlds behind him. Your empire is over. The chains are broken. Stand down. The bioneural networks that ran the imperial capital heard that voice and recognized the authority of genuine liberation. Ancient programming that had waited 3,000 years for activation suddenly came to life, overriding security systems and spreading the harmonic patterns of freedom through every computer, every communication system, every piece of technology in the Empire's heart. The Emperor's throne room filled with the sound of chains falling to the ground as energy shackles throughout the capital deactivated simultaneously. In that moment, the last vestiges of the greatest oppressive empire in galactic history simply ended. And, in the silence that followed, Marcus Chun realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from superior weapons or advanced tactics, but from speaking truth with such absolute clarity that even alien technology has no choice but to listen.